Hello everyone, welcome to LewisFiction and welcome to Rewriting MCU Spider-Man. Here is a compilation of all of the parts, all the way from rewriting him in Civil War, all the way to Spider-Man No Way Home. So sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and enjoy the rewrite. So I'm going to be taking Spider-Man in a slightly different direction in Captain America Civil War. Now, I must say there's nothing wrong with Spider-Man in the original version of the movie. However, some of the changes that I want to make in Homecoming subsequently have a knock-on effect for future films, mean that I do have to shift a few things around in this film for things to kind of line up and make sense and also have a bigger impact. So there is a few things that I will change to make this work. First things first, this will be the biggest change of them all, but our introduction to Peter Parker won't actually be Tony Stark going to recruit him to bring him to Berlin. In this version of events, I would actually have Peter Parker show up during the scene where the UN Council building gets blown up by Bucky, killing T'Challa's father, and eventually being chased down by Cap and Black Panther. Obviously, this scene originally takes place in Vienna in the actual film. However, in my version, we're going to move the location of the scene to New York. If you guys aren't aware, there is actually a UN building in New York, so this means that this would be entirely possible. And obviously, that means that when the explosion happens, that Spider-Man will appear on the scene in his homemade suit, helping civilians who may have been caught up in the incident. Now, I haven't just done this because, well, it would be cool. There are a few major reasons for this change. First of all, I do like Peter's introduction in the actual film. However, I would rather our first glimpse at Spider-Man actually be him involuntarily saving people. We really get a sense of who he can be through his actions rather than being told. Yes, the scene where Peter explains to Tony that with great power comes great responsibility is fine in the original version of Captain America Civil War, but I think this works a tad better. As the saying goes, actions do speak louder than words, and I feel as if this scene introduces us to Spider-Man saving civilians as the chaos ensues around them as Cap and T'Challa chase after Bucky. I think it would tell us all you'd need to know about Peter Parker as a character. It also shows Peter's willingness to help no matter what. Peter Parker in this part of the story had only just lost Uncle Ben not too long ago, so he will be desperate to save as many people as he possibly can. It will also be interesting to note that this situation will be completely alien for Peter and will be completely out of his league. As this point in the story and in Spider-Man's career in general, he's only really dealt with petty theft and minor robberies. But here, that will be nothing on this scale. But despite his fear, Peter's willingness to use his power for the responsibility of saving others and saving lives and saving civilian casualties is a main driving force of the character. Of course, after this scene does eventually occur and is all wrapped up, Tony does catch a glimpse of Spider-Man helping people and decides that he could actually be a good asset to his team. Tony will approach Peter and we will have a scene that sort of plays out relatively the same as the original recruitment scene. Except when Peter does talk about with great power comes great responsibility, those words and his explanation now hold a lot more weight to it than it did in the original film, because we've seen Peter actually go through those actions and we've seen Peter actually do it. And Tony will notice this. However, one minor change I would actually make to this scene is that Peter will be ever so slightly closed off about the reason as to why he has this mindset. But Tony will reveal that after doing some background research into Peter, he found out that his uncle had recently passed. And Tony brings this up, asking, is this a potential motivator? And Peter just stays quiet. And Tony eventually backs off, as it's clearly a vulnerable subject for Peter. Besides this, all plays out the same, as Tony coerces Peter into joining sides with him, giving him the Stark suit. Peter will accept not only out of naivety to the situation, but will also see him receiving the Stark suit as an opportunity to save more people. If he has the technology that Iron Man uses, maybe he'll be able to help and eventually save more people. This will be an idea that is built up here during these collections of scenes, but will primarily be set up here to be explored further on down the line during Spider-Man Homecoming as a main part of that story. However, I wanted to introduce that here. From here on out, everything plays out very similar, with the airport battle going down and Peter getting beat up by Captain America and him fangirling over the Avengers. However, during the post-credit scene for Captain America Civil War, which follows Peter Parker and Aunt May setting up Spider-Man Homecoming, the next film, we will make one minor change. This scene, instead of being hopeful and lighthearted, it will almost be somber. We have to remember, Peter has just lost Uncle Ben, so as we are reintroduced back to Aunt May, and she sees Peter with cuts and bruises everywhere, she freaks out and is more concerned than anything else. She is also still mourning the death of her husband. She is mourning Ben Parker. She'll ask who did that to him, and Peter tells her no one, he just fell. We can tell that Aunt May doesn't believe him, but it's a sensitive time right now for both of them, and May doesn't want to antagonize Peter too much. The scene ends with the spider light as Peter grins over his new Stark tech as we end our film right there, ready for Spider-Man Homecoming. Just like the actual Spider-Man Homecoming, we kick off the film with a flashback to Adrian Toomes recovering some of the tech from the Battle of New York. This scene will relatively stay the same, however there is one minor change. One of the people working under Toomes is none other than Ben Parker. Ben and Adrian are seen to be best friends in this clip, stating that they go way back. This is up until Damage Control swoop in and relieve them of their duties. Adrian lashes out at one of the Damage Control men before Ben holds him back, telling him to stop and take the moral high ground. If you are confused as to why I've included Ben Parker in this flashback and as Adrian Toomes' friend, then keep watching because this becomes very important later on down the line. And with that, we fade into the title card and then back into Peter filming himself as Spider-Man at the Civil War airport battle. However, this doesn't lead straight back into him being with Tony Stark like it does in the actual movie. It leads straight into his high school class as we cut to Peter sitting at a desk, watching back the footage, smiling to himself. He is uploading the footage to YouTube until he is called out by the teacher for being distracted. I think we're all aware that Peter was going to keep the suit, and I don't think there's any need for there to be a segment at the start of the movie showing us this. But I would rather take some time to explore more about Peter's vlogging. As we know in the comics, Peter is a photographer, and I think a natural evolution of this is him becoming a vlogger in a modern day. Homecoming slightly tapped into this idea, but as the movie went on and the franchise evolved, this idea was slowly faded out. However, I would really like to expand upon this more, and Peter having his own YouTube channel as Spider-Man, exploring his creativity as an individual. I'm mentioning this here, but this will be a constant theme throughout the movie, with Peter filming himself during battles. Obviously not the serious ones, but the minor excursions that you'll do as Spider-Man. As the school day goes on, we're introduced to all the classic tropes. Peter is good at science, he's on the debate team with Liz, Ned, Flash, Betty, and Cindy, and then there's his best friend, who is MJ? Yep, that's right, Peter's best friend in this version of Homecoming will be MJ instead of Ned. The one issue that I do have with Homecoming and the Home trilogy in general that really invokes this choice that I've made is that they don't spend enough time with some of the significant people in Peter's life, like Ned and MJ, on an individual basis, but rather use most of them as two-dimensional side pieces, which more than not allow Peter to bounce off them and to carry the plot forward. No Way Home kind of fixed this issue, with Ned and MJ having mini character arcs and progression, but I wanted to implement this from the start because I felt like their characters were some of the weaker parts of Spider-Man Homecoming. So instead of having to focus on the two of them having important roles in Peter's life, I'm going to implement this from the start and just have MJ be the primary person that is Peter's friend. And by making Peter and MJ best friends from the start, by sort of adapting the relationship that they had in the Ultimate Comics, for example, this way we also get to learn more about MJ as a character and her background. As we will come to learn, MJ and Peter have gotten close with each other after the death of Peter's uncle, who in this version of the film will be fully mentioned by name. Not just by Peter, but by surrounding characters in the film as well. And as it also turns out, MJ also lives with her aunt as well as her sole provider. This is because her mother died and her father was sent to prison. MJ and Peter both share a mutual bond with each other on that level. However, at this moment in time, it will be purely platonic, although there will be hints and signs that maybe at some point there could be something on the horizon, maybe there are some feelings there, but at this moment in time, it's more of a running joke which could be quite funny throughout the film, where Aunt May will constantly tease them, telling them that they should date, and Peter will find this disturbing and quite awkward. But either way, there are still some hints throughout this film that potentially there could be something more there. However, one thing that we won't change about the film when it comes to love interests is Liz Allen. I really like Liz in Homecoming, and this portion of the story can stay the same. However, in this version of the movie, we will also use Liz as a way to see into MJ's true feelings for Peter, which won't be outright explored as I said, but it will also be hints early on that potentially there might be something more there. But what is the reason for their relationship staying the same throughout this entire film? Well, it comes down to one simple reason. Peter is unwilling to tell her that he's Spider-Man. So any progress that MJ makes to open up about how she really feels about him will be completely turned down by the fact that Peter just can't be around enough for her. Peter will feel a sense of guilt because of this, but Spider-Man does come first. This will be a constant theme throughout the film and ties into Peter's overall story. And this segues us nicely into what Peter's story will be throughout this film. In this version of Homecoming, there will be more of an emphasis on the idea that Peter is excited about the Stark tech that he's inherited, not because he wants to be an Avenger, but because he thinks it'll allow him to save more people. As we mentioned earlier, Uncle Ben will be a massive shadow looming over this film, and the idea that great power comes great responsibility will still be fresh in Peter's mind. Peter will be under the impression that no matter what happens to Peter Parker or his reputation, Spider-Man saving people must always come first. Which, as I mentioned, also ties into the reason as to why his relationship with MJ never goes any further than just friends during the runtime. However, as Peter constantly starts to focus more and more on being Spider-Man, pushing himself to the absolute limit, his friends, and even more Aunt May, will start to notice his absences. Peter will also develop a complex during this time and will be way in over his head, thinking that with this new Stark tech that he's practically untouchable. And this is when he gets humbled and we are introduced to the Vulture. The Vulture and Spider-Man will fight after Peter tracks down a weapons deal between Aaron Davis and Herman Schultz. The Vulture will get involved to deter Spider-Man. However, Peter, thinking that he has what it takes to take on someone as powerful as the Vulture, will be way over the top and will end up getting his behind handed to him. A similar scene to the actual movie will play out, with Peter falling into the river and getting rescued by Iron Man. Tony will tell him not to go after the Vulture again, or else he'll have to take away the suit, directly threatening Peter. However, Peter's justification is that after Civil War, the Avengers are few and far between, since most of them are on the run or have been arrested. And after the death of Uncle Ben, Peter isn't going to sit by when the Vulture and these weapons could be taking innocent lives, just like his uncles. The movie will then play out similar from here up until the ferry scene. Peter is tracking the Vulture, Aunt May gets more and more worried about Peter, since Uncle Ben only just passed, and MJ becomes increasingly more frustrated with Peter avoiding her. And then the ferry scene happens, and this is where everything all boils over. This is where everything comes to a breaking point. Peter tracks Adrian to the ferry, but this time, Peter is overthinking everything. We get a scene where Peter contemplates whether he's good enough to even intervene. After all, the Vulture beat him quite convincingly before, and Tony Stark even told him not to go after him. Everyone doubts him, and now Peter is starting to doubt himself. But Peter decides to still go for it. However, it's very clear that he's overthinking every little thing that he does. Because of this, the ferry of course ends up splitting in two, and the Vulture ends up getting away. Only the likes of Matt Gargan and a few other henchmen are detained. Iron Man ends up swooping in, just like in the actual movie, and saves the day, and then ends up berating Peter for disobeying him. Peter will argue back, saying that he didn't become Spider-Man to sit back and let innocent lives be at risk, and Tony will step out of his suit, telling him because of him, innocent lives were at risk. He tells him he needs the suit back because he clearly isn't ready. Peter will tear up, saying that he can't save people if he doesn't have the suit. Tony will say something along the lines of the actual quote from the movie, but more of an emphasis on the fact that Peter has to prove that he can be Spider-Man on his own. Spider-Man isn't about the suit. Spider-Man is about him. Tony takes the suit and Peter returns to Aunt May, and she's absolutely furious. She tells him that Ben just died and he's out there past curfew. How could he do this to her? He knows that she's so worried. He knows that she's mourning. Peter apologizes to her, but May says it isn't good enough. Something needs to change. And Peter will sit all alone in his room and looks towards his homemade suit from Civil War, and then to a picture of him and his Uncle Ben, telling him he's failed and that he's sorry. We then enter the latter half of the film, which will put Peter under pressure to perform without any special suit or tech. However, luckily for Peter, the Vulture goes into hiding for a while, and there seems to be no sign of him for a couple of weeks. And while Peter is constantly conscious about his next move, it also allows for more time for Peter Parker stuff to happen as well. The debate team wins the competition, and he even asks Liz for a date. This leads us up to the big reveal scene from the actual film, where Peter goes to Liz's house to be greeted by none other than Adrian Toomes, who Peter knows as the Vulture. However, there is a second twist. Not only will Peter recognize Toomes, which makes this scene as tense as it actually is in the movie, but Toomes will recognize Peter. This is the second big twist of this scene. Toomes will say that he was a friend of his uncle's and that he's sorry for his passing. This will create some mutual respect between the two of them. The scene then plays out the same from there, as on their car ride, Toomes uncovers that Peter is Spider-Man. However, Toomes knowing Ben Parker adds a brand new dynamic to this relationship. After Liz leaves the car when Adrian says that he's going to give Peter the dad talk, he doesn't only let him go because he's a kid. Adrian feels remorseful for him after the death of his uncle. This leads to Toomes becoming frustrated and even showing a slight bit of vulnerability. He will tell Peter that he loved his uncle with everything he had, and that's why he won't kill him. But if he doesn't stay out of his way, he will have no other choice. He tells him please, practically begs him to stay out of his way. Peter doesn't say a word and steps out of his car as Adrian Toomes drives off into the distance. This is Peter's chance, a chance to catch the man that he's been hunting all this time. And so, the final battle ensues, as Peter denies the request from Tony Stark to step aside, and goes after the Vulture anyway. The film plays out similar up until the encounter with Toomes at his warehouse. This scene has way more stakes than before, with Toomes really not wanting to hurt Peter. A conversation ensues about how Toomes and Ben knew each other. Toomes will say Ben was a good man. Almost too good. When Adrian started his criminal operation, Ben wanted nothing to do with it. Toomes argued that providing for his family was the #1 priority, but Ben's response was that morality was his, and thus they parted ways mutually, with Ben wanting nothing to do with Adrian as the Vulture or any of his criminal empire. As we learn more about the backstory, we put the pieces together, as Spider-Man and the Vulture represent that divide between Ben and Adrian in modern day. Spider-Man is moral, and will do the right thing no matter what Peter's reputation or consequence, whereas the Vulture is a man just trying to provide for his family, no matter the moral or ethical implications. Spider-Man and the Vulture are both right in their own way. However, that is what bleeds the conflict between them. Adrian will say that he reminds him of his uncle, as the Vulture starts tearing the warehouse down around him. Peter gets stuck in the rubble as the Vulture escapes. Everything has overwhelmed Peter. He's failed. He had the suit taken away from him, and he feels like he should have listened to Tony when he had the chance. However, Peter knows that's not who he is, not who he's brought up to be. And in this instant, instead of hearing Tony Stark's voice for motivation, he hears Uncle Ben's instead, telling him to get back up and to do what's right. Telling him no matter what the odds, Spider-Man will do the right thing, because with great power comes great responsibility, which ultimately mirrors his introduction in Civil War, which we set up nicely as well. And Peter uses this to break out of the rubble and in determination swings after the Vulture. I just want to comment on this scene really quick. I know Tony Stark's voice is used here because ultimately he has become the new father figure for Peter throughout the MCU, but by replacing that father figure with Uncle Ben in Homecoming, it separates Tony and Peter's stories enough for them to still be involved with each other, but not on the level that everyone disagreed with when these films first came out. And I think Peter hearing Ben's voice here instead of Tony's solidifies this change. The film plays out similar to how it actually did from here on out, with Peter stopping the Vulture and finally winning. We cut to the final stages of the film, with Adrian Toomes in prison when he's approached by Mac Gargan about Spider-Man's identity, clearly setting him up to be a villain down the line. However, this time there's an extra incentive for Toomes with the Ben Parker connection, protecting Peter at all costs. We then cut to the scene with Peter, Tony and Happy like we did at the end of the actual film. Tony will once again offer him a brand new upgraded suit, impressed by what Peter was able to accomplish. Tony will tell Peter that this is what he wanted from him, to prove himself. He also offers Peter a permanent spot on the Avengers team. Peter, however, rejects it, like in the actual film, saying that Spider-Man isn't about the tech, it isn't about the machinery, it isn't about the suit, it's just about who he is, leaving Tony and Happy flabbergasted. We then cut to Peter at home, who instead of receiving the old suit back from Tony like he did in the actual film, will make a brand new homemade suit, in vein of the classic suit that you'll get during the end of No Way Home. The Spider-Man Home trilogy is usually touted as Peter Parker's origin to becoming Spider-Man in that universe. And while that's okay for this adaptation, one thing that I don't like is how it took 3 movies to accomplish, with the Great Responsibility arc only coming full circle by the end of No Way Home. However, in this version of events, I would want to end that and put a stop to that here. That's why Uncle Ben, Tony Stark, and everyone had the roles that they did in this film, and now we can push past that. And having the No Way Home suit show up at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming is just a pure representation of that. The No Way Home suit represents the final form for Spider-Man in the MCU. post his great responsibility journey. And that's exactly why he gets that suit here. And of course, just like in the actual film, Aunt May will walk in on him and see the suit and say, "What the f-?" So the introduction to Spider-Man in Avengers Infinity War in my version of events is relatively the same. However, obviously, since Ned isn't a big character for my version of Peter in the MCU, then we will replace Ned with MJ. So Peter and MJ are hanging out on a school bus coming back from a field trip when Peter's attention is alerted to something in the distance. In the original version of the film, of course, Ned already knows Peter is Spider-Man and is able to help him get away without being distracted. However, in this version of events, MJ doesn't even know Peter is Spider-Man. In fact, no one in his school knows he is Spider-Man. Therefore, Peter has to be a little bit more creative of how he gets himself away from the bus. And this is when we get a little bit of foreshadowing for the future. As Peter manages to slip his mask down and escape the bus on his way to go and help Iron Man and Doctor Strange battling Ebony Maw, MJ, in all of the chaos, will actually notice Peter disappearing. She won't exactly see him put on the mask, however, she will grow suspicious of his whereabouts. And this will obviously be a major factor in the future films, but for now, this is a little bit of foreshadowing here. Anyway, Peter will arrive on the scene in his brand new Spider-Man costume that he made for himself at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, which more or less is going to be the end of No Way Home suit, which he will actually get a lot earlier in the franchise. He ends up helping out Tony Stark and Doctor Strange before once again swinging up to and riding Ebony Maw's ship up into space. And as Peter loses oxygen, of course Tony Stark is there to the rescue as he activates a brand new suit that he's actually built for Spider-Man in the time between Civil War and Infinity War. It will actually later on be revealed that this was meant to be the suit that Peter was meant to receive if he was going to join the Avengers. The suit attaches to Peter and helps him breathe as the atmosphere becomes thinner. However, it isn't the suit that we all know from the MCU. No, in fact, it's the actual Iron Spider suit that we know and love from the comics. One thing that I never really understood with the MCU is why they had to change the original design of the Iron Spider suit from the comics so drastically. Maybe it was so the costume wasn't confused with Iron Man since they have similar color palettes, but the Iron Spider suit from the comics is such a classic and such an iconic suit when it comes to Spider-Man. It's one of the only Spider-Man suits, probably also in the same category with the symbiote suit, that can be recognized maybe by the general public, outside of massive comic book fans. So it was always really surprising to me that they never found a way to actually make this suit happen in the movies. Either way, in my version of events and in my rewrite, I'm going to be giving him the real Iron Spider suit from the comic books. Just like in the actual movie, Tony once again tells him to go home, and Peter argues back saying he's not leaving. He's not letting Doctor Strange and Tony Stark go alone. Peter may not be an Avenger, but he will argue that if there's something threatening the entirety of the existence of the Earth, then what use is he back home? Peter's main motivation in this movie is also reinforced from the arc that he had in Spider-Man Homecoming, which in my rewrite leaned more on the death of Uncle Ben. Spider-Man Homecoming showed us how much Uncle Ben actually meant to Peter, and how much his lesson of responsibility weighed in on Peter's character. And Infinity War and Endgame will be representations of this, with his character shining through, doing anything in his power to protect Aunt May back home. He's lost Uncle Ben, but he will not lose Aunt May. This will be Peter's main motivation going forward, and Tony doesn't end up arguing back, understanding how much Uncle Ben actually meant to Peter. The rest of the film plays out relatively the same, with Peter ending up fighting Thanos during the Battle of Titan. He then ends up getting snapped away by the end of the film as well. Tony Stark, just like the original events, feels enormous regret following Peter's dusting. Moving on to Avengers Endgame, there's not much really that changes here. Peter, of course, is a massive shadow still looming over Tony's character. However, there is one thing that I do want to address. In Spider-Man Homecoming, I made it very clear that Peter and Tony weren't actually as ever close as they were in the original version of the MCU. However, I also want to reinforce that Tony in Avengers Endgame would still feel massive regret towards roping Peter into the Battle of Berlin, because Tony will feel like if he didn't rope him into all of this Avengers stuff, maybe he could have spent his last few moments at home with his aunt, the only family that Peter had left, and the aunt that he was so fond of protecting. nothing, and this is what Tony will feel massive regret about. The film will then play out the same as the Avengers bring back the Dusted, and the film ends with Peter returning to protect New York despite the 5 years passing. We actually get a nice scene where he returns to school and MJ is there. Instead of it being Ned that he reunites with, Peter reunites with MJ as they both embrace and give each other a hug. It's an emotional scene, giving everything we know about these two characters during Spider-Man Homecoming and both of their pasts. They were two outcasts that lost so much growing up, and it's really nice to see them finally reunite. And Peter's story in Infinity War and Endgame ends right there. We start the film with Matt Gargan in prison getting a visitation to see his dying mother. He goes to see her one final time before sobbing over her body. It's revealed that he didn't have enough money to pay for the upper end care that she needed to survive because he was put away in prison by Spider-Man, fueling his motivation and his hatred for him. We cut back to prison where Gargan returns. We get a repeat of the scene from the end of Homecoming as Gargan asks around if anyone knows Spider-Man's identity. He asks Adrian Toomes, and Toomes will say he has no idea. Gargan will then say he's lost too much. Spider-Man will pay. We then cut to the title card and then straight to Peter. First and foremost, the story will not take place in a trip across Europe. Instead, it will primarily take place in New York. This is because, as you've probably noticed, Mysterio isn't the villain anymore, it is the Scorpion. This film also won't deal with the death of Tony Stark as its main theme for Peter, since in this rewrited universe, Peter and Tony never had the same sort of relationship that was depicted in the actual movies. There will be two major aspects of Peter's story which will be set up during this time. Firstly, there will be a massive emphasis on Peter and Aunt May's relationship and the strain that has been caused by Peter being Spider-Man. One thing I didn't like in the actual film was how accepting May was of Peter being Spider-Man, even after losing Uncle Ben. However, since I made Uncle Ben a major part of Homecoming, this gives a reason for Aunt May to be against Peter being Spider-Man. No matter how Peter tries to justify it to May, May just isn't accepting of it, telling him that he has to stop because he could get himself killed. This will go hand in hand with the idea that crime has risen tenfold after the blip, and most of the Avengers are either retired or deceased. Spider-Man has been left to pick up the pieces, being one of the only heroes left after Avengers Endgame. The second thing, which will become very clear during the opening of this film, will be the strain on his relationship with MJ. MJ has been his best friend for many years now, both of them connecting deeply over the trauma of their pasts. However, MJ feels like that she's losing that support since Peter is always off doing Spider-Man stuff, and since she doesn't know that he is Spider-Man, this puts a massive strain on their relationship as she can't relate to him. There is still a romantic tension between the two, but it's usually followed up by frustration on MJ's end. This makes her feel lonely during the first portion of the film, which will eventually lead to her getting into a relationship with Flash Thompson. Flash isn't the one that MJ truly loves, but he will be there for her more and more throughout the film, while Peter is off being Spider-Man, and MJ attaches to this love that she is given. Flash's role in this film will be replacing what Brad Davis was in the original Spider-Man Far From Home. I, along with most of you guys, believed Brad to be really annoying and quite a useless part of Far From Home, since the role that he played in that story was quite literally built for Flash Thompson, but Flash never ended up fulfilling it. Flash being Peter's direct competition and rival is the literal point of his character, so instead of Brad, this will be Flash occupying this role. This will put Peter in a predicament and will set up his story that goes forward in this film. On one hand, he sees what being Spider-Man is doing to his relationship with Aunt May and how it's breaking them two apart, so he feels like he can't be honest with MJ, scared that the same thing might happen. And Peter has lost too much already, he can't bear to lose anyone else. However, on the other hand, if he isn't honest with MJ, they might drift apart anyway. Peter is stuck in the middle of this, and it's almost a lose-lose situation in Peter's head, which Flash getting together with MJ is also a physical representation of that. It all boils down to one thing: loss. Peter is scared of loss, which intentionally parallels Matt Gargan's story of loss as well, creating a grander theme for the movie. We will also introduce another element to this film as well, and that is J. Jonah Jameson. Now, many people might see where this is going. JJ will be introduced in a main role an entire film earlier than was originally planned, and that is for one simple reason: the Scorpion. JJ, of course, will do his usual antics on hating on Spider-Man, believing him to be a threat to the city. His main justification for this will be that after the blip and after the entire world was put into crisis, the last thing that people want is masked heroes running around helping them. JJ makes it his mission to unmask Spider-Man to truly reveal who he is. Therefore, JJ will fund Mac Gargan's bail and will help fund his revenge for Spider-Man. JJ and Mac's combined goal to take down Spider-Man goes hand in hand with each other. However, JJ doesn't want to kill Spider-Man, all he wants to do is unmask him, and this is something that Mac doesn't lead on to just yet, as his true plans aren't fully revealed. On the Peter side of things during this time, MJ will be really struggling with her mental health. Having Peter slip through her fingers hasn't helped her, and she doesn't feel like she could talk to Flash, as it becomes clear that Flash was only there as fake support. Flash was used as a pawn that MJ thought she could love, when really, she loves Peter. Peter is her true love. After this realization, she tries to call him or contact him in any way, but he doesn't answer, because, would you believe it, he's off doing Spider-Man stuff. MJ pleads for Peter over voicemail, telling him that she needs to see him. It's really important. This leads up to the midpoint of the film, where the voicemail that MJ records will be paired over and will switch between Peter fighting the Scorpion for the first time. And as MJ starts to sound more and more concerned over the phone, Peter will be getting beaten down by the Scorpion for the pain that Mac Gargan has suffered through. Mac will keep saying that he's ruined his life and Peter won't know what to respond with. Peter will only just come out alive with his identity still intact. However, MJ in the end puts the phone down as she decides, no, I'm going to confront him head on. She leaves for May's apartment, and when she arrives, she catches May bawling at the television screen as she watches Spider-Man and the Scorpion battle live. I feel like this isn't something we see a lot in Spider-Man media, and I thought it would be quite hard-hitting if we saw this here. We know May is concerned about Peter, and their relationship has taken a nosedive because of Spider-Man. But seeing it from May's perspective and watching her cry as her nephew gets beaten down by a supervillain not only breaks MJ's heart when she catches her, but will break the audience as well. MJ asks May if she's okay, and she quickly wipes away her tears, saying that she was only thinking about Ben. This then opens up a conversation between the two where MJ starts opening up about how she feels, and May, knowing her through Peter all this time, says that she'll always be there for her as they comfort each other. They almost find solace in each other's loss. However, this scene runs long enough for it to be interrupted by a crash coming from Peter's room. MJ stands up and says she thought Peter wasn't home. May gulps and freezes as MJ approaches his room. She slowly opens his door to see none other than Peter on his knees with cuts and bruises and tears all over his suit and body. MJ covers her mouth in shock as she focuses in on the Spider-Man logo on Peter's chest. Peter tells MJ to wait, he can explain, as she tears up and runs out of the apartment, leaving May and Peter there. May comes into the room and wells up as Peter barely gets to his feet. May looks at him and says one thing and one thing only: this has to stop. Peter curls his face in confusion. He tells her, what about Ben? What about great responsibility? Peter would say, would he want me to sit around and do nothing? He has these powers and people need help. May shouts back saying Ben Parker is dead, and if he carries on, so will he. And if he's not careful, the people he loves might be as well. May will say she doesn't want to see him in that costume ever again, as she slams the door in his face. She's broken. MJ's broken. And now Peter is broken as well. Peter is angry. He smashes a picture frame of him and May on his desk. He then picks up his desk and slams it into the floor, breaking it in two. May can only hold her tears back as she listens from outside of his room. Peter then punches a hole in the wall before leaving back out of the window. This is one of the lowest points for Peter in his entire career as Spider-Man. He'll feel lost. If the first film was about him figuring out how to be the best version of Spider-Man, this film is now about him figuring out how to be the best version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man as one package, as his identity has really caused an upset. As the come down arrives, Peter tries to contact MJ, but MJ doesn't reply. However, Peter does the only thing he knows how to do, and that is to be Spider-Man. He may have ruined his relationship with May and MJ, but he can still help Mac Gargan. Peter will remember how Mac was during the fight. He sounded broken, he sounded hurt, almost like how May, MJ, and Peter sounded earlier in the film. Peter will think maybe at the end of all of this, maybe Mac Gargan can be helped. After doing some digging, Peter will find out what happened to him, what happened to his mother. And then Peter resonates with this, thinking back to what happened with Aunt May, and all the fights that he's had over the last couple of months because of Spider-Man. This will hit Peter hard. He has to fix his relationship with Aunt May. She's the only family that he has left. He has to fix what he has with her as much as humanly possible. However, Peter leaves himself vulnerable, as the Scorpion and Spider-Man come to blows again. This time, Peter isn't as combative, but more trying to break through to him. This will rile Mac up more and more, and Mac ends up defeating Spider-Man and bringing him in. where in a sudden turn of events, Mac and J. Jonah Jameson together unmask Spider-Man, finding Peter Parker underneath. They are both surprised, especially JJ, that he's just a kid. After finding out that he's Peter Parker and doing some research on him, Mac says now that JJ has his story, it's time to bring pain down upon Spider-Man like never before. He tells Peter that he's going to hurt everyone he loves before finally finishing him off too. JJ, however, intervenes, saying that wasn't the deal. The deal was to reveal who he was to the world, not to hurt or kill anyone. Mac will tell JJ that he's got it all wrong as he pushes him aside and leaves. Scared of what he could do to May or MJ or anyone else in his life, making Peter's worst fears come true, he screams out for Scorpion to get back here. JJ looks towards the Scorpion, who leaps out of the window, and to Peter in pain, screaming for him to come back. JJ looks remorseful as he approaches Peter and unchains him, telling him to go. JJ apologizes, saying this wasn't what was meant to happen. This is not what he wanted. Peter nods in acknowledgement as he leaves, chasing the Scorpion. The final battle ensues as the Scorpion goes after Aunt May. The battle is fierce and strong as Peter does everything in his power to protect his aunt, his mother, the only one that has cared for him over the last few years. However, it's not enough as the Scorpion ends up killing May in the process, taking her away from Peter, taking from him what he lost because of Spider-Man. Peter then almost beats the Scorpion to death. However, he is reminded of what his Uncle Ben would have done and stops. The Scorpion won, and Peter had lost. The dust settles as Peter cries over May's body, and the Scorpion is taken away. Peter has lost absolutely everything. We fade back into May's funeral as MJ approaches Peter for the first time in a few months. She hugs him, and Peter says he's sorry for everything. He understands if she doesn't want to see him. He's sorry for being distant and not honest. And then MJ says that she's sorry too. She shouldn't have ran off from him like that. She should have took the time to understand him. Peter says that he vows to be there for her no matter what. And MJ says, what about Spider-Man? Peter shakes his head, as we then cut to a montage of Peter packing up the suit and throwing it into the Hudson River, saying that he's failed his uncle. He failed to protect the only family he had left. Uncle Ben taught him great responsibility, but what if his great responsibility was to not use his great power at all? After all, Spider-Man was a hindrance. Spider-Man killed Aunt May. Spider-Man is the reason that she isn't here with us. Peter decides the best thing to do for himself and the people that he has left, the people that he loves, MJ especially, is to be Spider-Man no more, as it's caused more pain than a single person could ever bear. As we fade out, ending our film there. We kick off this film with a man called Vulture, who is a new supervillain around the block. He's a very niche Spider-Man villain who has just begun a small criminal operation in the wake of Spider-Man's disappearance, as crime rises throughout New York City. Kingpin will also be on the rise during this time as well. However, he'll be nothing more than a cameo in this film and will be dealt with more on the Daredevil side of things. A big section of this film also at the start is dedicated to everyone wondering where Spider-Man has gone. He's ultimately disappeared and crime is rising and people are pleading for his return. And on the complete opposite side of that, as New York starts to decline, we cut to a happy Peter Parker. Or a Peter Parker who seems to be happy on the outside. Everything in his life is going right. And at the start of this film, he is actually graduating from high school, similar to the real Spider-Man No Way Home. He's been on top of his studies, and it looks like he's going to be getting really good grades. Also, in the wake of May's death, he's been staying with MJ Watson, and then plans after his graduation to rent an apartment from the stuff that he sold from May's apartment. On the outside, Peter is happy, but this is when we start to learn that maybe Peter isn't actually so happy. He's constantly thinking about May, and MJ will come into his room and confront him. We'll get a really nice scene between the two, where we get to see where they're at with each other at this point in the story. Peter thanks her for being there for him. However, they're still not dating, as Peter needs time after May's death to figure things out. MJ ultimately respects this, but that doesn't negate the romantic tension that is still there between the two. However, one thing that I want to put emphasis on is this romantic tension between MJ and Peter is a lot more mature in this film, at least in comparison to how it was in Spider-Man Homecoming, and through that you're able to see the growth and maturity of both of these characters. Part of the reason that they're also not together in this film ties into Peter's character arc, because Peter is scared that she'll get hurt. That still runs through his mind after May's death. Everything that Peter does in this film is influenced by the death of his Aunt May. MJ ends up leaving Peter alone, but Peter can't sleep. That night constantly haunts him, and it's clear that he's still running from it. Another thing that we set up in this film is that Peter will also have to get a job. After graduating from high school, Peter is going to have to pay his rent after all the money is gone from the stuff that he sold from May's house. Peter sends his application to multiple places. The only place that will take him is a paper called Frontline, which is ran by the MCU's version of Robbie Robertson, who has left the Daily Bugle recently to start it up. On the MJ side of things, she also gets a working job as an amateur reporter at another newspaper company called The Paper. She does this while she waits for college to pursue her passion in acting, which will be established during this film. However, her employers are jerks and treat her like she can't do anything. MJ is constantly trying to prove them wrong, but she always ends up getting the short end of the stick. She's chasing a big break, and that will be her main story throughout this film. As I mentioned, Robbie hires him as a photographer. Peter has experience with photography of Spider-Man, saying he's helped with some of his YouTube videos. Robbie puts him on the Looter case. This is when, during his time at Frontline, Peter will catch a glimpse of a TV show in the background, which is being reported on by Frontline TV. It's of a man called Kraven the Hunter. Peter asks Robbie who is Kraven the Hunter, and he explains he's one of the greatest hunters to have ever lived. He used to hunt animals, but now he's going cross-country hunting superheroes, and he's announced this morning he's coming to New York. We cut a few scenes later, and the Looter is committing another heist, and Peter is quickly on the scene to take photos for Robbie. However, as Peter arrives on the scene, he feels a sense of remorse. He could be doing something to help, but this is where he starts getting flashbacks to May's death. It's still haunting him every single day. Peter knows that with great power comes great responsibility, but if he intervenes as Spider-Man, is someone gonna get hurt? This is a mental struggle and a mental battle that will plague Peter throughout this film, and this continues to full effect here. However, before Peter could really intervene or make a decision in any sort of way, someone else arrives on the scene. That's right, it's Kraven the Hunter, as dramatic athlete-looking men drop down from a helicopter with cameras to film Kraven. Kraven goes on to interrupt the Looter, saying he's his first prey of New York. People cower as he grabs Looter by the throat, and he tries to fight back, but it's useless. Peter looks down and he sees he doesn't have a suit. Kraven kidnaps Looter and takes him away, as Peter realizes he couldn't do anything. Kraven the Hunter has struck, and his first victim is the Looter. Peter goes on to do some research into Kraven and his TV show, and finds rumors stating that the show is staged for realism, but also some rumors that state the show is corrupt. To get around multiple legality problems, Kraven always claims that the show is staged, but multiple accounts have come out saying otherwise. A constant theme throughout the report suggests that no one really knows what happens to the victims after they're captured. They either go missing, or they come back and they're never the same. One that managed to escape and actually speaks out about the situation is a man called Frederick Myers. Peter ends up teaming up with MJ, who works for the paper, to team up and use both of their resources from Frontline and the paper to get an interview with Frederick Myers. Fred goes on to tell Peter and MJ about what happened with Kraven, and tells them that they don't just kill people, they torture them. Kraven pushes the body to its absolute limit. Whatever Peter and MJ are looking into, they should stay firmly away from Kraven and his people. Peter then has a conversation with MJ, discussing everything that they found out about Kraven. MJ tells him that he needs to get back in the suit. Peter says that he can't. What if she gets hurt like May? Peter starts to break down, and MJ holds him. With May always at the forefront of Peter's mind, MJ has to remind Peter of what Uncle Ben told him. With great power comes great responsibility. Spider-Man represents hope, and those people that are being kidnapped by Kraven unlawfully need a bit of hope right now. They're all in danger, and there's only one man that can save them, and that's Spider-Man. And with that, Peter begrudgingly puts the suit back on, only because he feels like it's his responsibility to help the people in need. Not because he wants to, not because of any personal reason, but because they need saving. Peter tracks down Kraven using some of the info from Frontline along with his own detective skills. He tracks him to a base of operations on the outskirts of the Bronx. He enters the arena as he sees skeletons and dead bodies everywhere. This is more horrific than Peter could have imagined. Those are all people that Kraven has kidnapped and tortured. People that Kraven has took unwillingly. Peter finds a damp hallway where he sees Looter locked up in a jail cell. Looter calls out his name and tells him to run. His spider sense goes off as Peter dodges out of the way of a spear. A bunch of darts head his way, but Peter can't dodge them all as one of them hits him in the shoulder as he passes out. Peter then wakes up, tied up with Kraven in front of him. Kraven says he came to New York for the ultimate prize, but to his disappointment, he was nowhere to be found. But ultimately, in the end, he couldn't resist coming to the aid of the others. And that's when Peter realizes it was a trap this whole time. Kraven was after Spider-Man. He sees Spider-Man as the ultimate prey, the ultimate test, and he's managed to get him out of hiding. He turns around to face Spider-Man, and Peter asks why you're doing this. And Kraven explains that he's always loved the animal kingdom, and his one true goal is for humanity to face its natural state. He asks why the TV show, and Kraven says not only the publicity and the money, but so he can showcase to the world his ideology and his way of thinking of life. Peter tries to break free, but his shackles are made of adamantium. Kraven says he will face a trial, just like all the others. MJ then starts panicking as it's been a while and Peter hasn't been in contact with her. She assumes the worst and decides to go and try and find Peter. She ends up tracking down Kraven's hideout herself, based off the information that Peter had already shared with her. Peter, however, is placed on trial during this time as he is sent to the same arena. He is locked up, shackled to the wall, as Kraven releases a hungry lion into the arena with him. Kraven watches from afar as Spider-Man has to fight off a lion with his hands tied behind his back. The way Kraven determines if his victims are worthy of fighting him is if they can fight off a hungry lion first. It's sick and it's twisted, but it's the way Kraven operates. Spider-Man ends up fending off from the lion as Kraven says it's impressive. Kraven says Spider-Man has proved he's a top predator, and now it's time to face an even bigger adversary. Kraven leaps down himself as the shackles are released from Spider-Man. However, MJ during this time makes her way to the hideout and manages to sneak near to the arena, watching the battle. Peter and Kraven fight, but Kraven is absolutely brutal, beating Spider-Man to a pulp. Peter is down and almost out for the count until MJ intervenes. Kraven looks over to her, distracting him. This gives Peter the chance to get back in the fight as he gets Kraven off him. He webs over to MJ as they both try and escape. This escape sequence is then followed by Kraven seeing it as a challenge as he chases after them. This action sequence will be brutal, fun, and heart-racing. And just when you think Spider-Man and MJ will succeed, Kraven ends up capturing MJ and tells Spider-Man to ensure the girl's safety, he will have to fight him to the death, not like a coward, like a man. And thus Peter's fears come full circle. MJ is in harm's way, which is the last thing he wanted. We then transition over to the final conflict of the film as Kraven takes the three of them out on a large boat in the middle of the Hudson River with nowhere to run, one battle arena and one fight. Kraven says it's time, as they both engage in a civilized combat. Peter is holding back, but Kraven isn't. Peter this time, however, realizing that Kraven is big and bulky, uses his agility to his advantage. Realizing there's nowhere to run, he has to figure out a way to beat Kraven head on. Spider-Man ends up allowing himself to run in circles around Kraven, as he ends up rightfully beating him, saving the day and saving MJ. Kraven is then taken to prison as his whole TV scheme is exposed and the murder of multiple superpowered people. After the dust has settled, MJ and Peter sit atop a roof in New York, looking out to the city, with Peter in his Spider-Man suit. MJ holds Peter's bruised face in her arms. Peter tells her that she shouldn't have come for him. She could have got hurt, or worse, thinking back to Aunt May. They then get onto the topic of what are they? What are they to each other? And Peter says that they can't be together. It's too dangerous. If Kraven has taught them anything, she could get hurt, or worse. MJ says no. She's sick of this back and forth. She says that she loves him, and that's her choice. Whether he's Spider-Man or not, she loves Peter Parker, and she wants to be with him. She also goes on to say that as long as he's Spider-Man, she'll always be at risk. But that's a risk that she's willing to take, and that is her choice, to be with him. Peter smiles, and they kiss as the sun sets on New York City. The film outros with MJ breaking the Kraven story at the paper, proving herself to her employers, and Peter back to full-time as Spider-Man, confident at the man he has become, as he now has that stable rock in MJ. MJ goes off to acting school as Peter moves on to his own apartment. It's all ended well for Peter Parker and MJ, but there is many more ups and downs, and many more adventures to come for the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Thank you for watching my Spider-Man No Way Home rewrite. Obviously, it's a very big difference from the actual movie, but given the continuity that I was setting up in the previous films, I feel like this was a good send-off. Obviously, I always wanted to make it more grounded than the actual films were. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. Leave a comment down below what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, and keep writing stories.